Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Syafini binti Hazali, matrix number 2020890134. Today I would like to talk about the factor that cause our currency to depreciate. But first, I would like to give a brief introduction about currency depreciation. Currency depreciation is a fall in the value of a currency in terms of its exchange rate versus other currency. As stated in the question on 19 May 2022, the ringgit depreciated to its lowest point at 4.4078 against the US dollar. There are four major factors that cause our currency to depreciate. Firstly, crude oil prices. There are a direct correlation between the movement of crude oil prices and the ringgit. It means that when crude oil prices increase, the ringgit will increase too. For example, the ringgit strengthened to its highest point since May 2016, hitting 3.86 against the US dollar as the crude oil rebounded. The action taken by the members of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, to control their oil production also determined the ringgit's movement. When OPEC reduces its production, oil prices will soar eventually. At the same time, ringgit will also rise and vice versa. Secondly, overnight policy rate (OPR). OPR is the interest rate set by our central bank, Bank Negara Malaysia, which determines the rate of interest for financial institutions that lend each other money overnight. An increase in the interest rate can contribute to the increase of a country's currency. However, the domestic economy may have encountered a negative impact due to a rise in interest rates, such as household and national debt. Nevertheless, if the OPR remains low, it may cause an outflow of capital as money goes to countries that offer high interest rate to get high returns. Thirdly, new political landscape. General election on 9 May 2018 shocked and concerned many parties, including foreign investors, as Malaysia changed its government for the first time in 60 years. The ringgit has weakened 1.67% against the US dollar since the 14th general election. From this situation, the political landscape clearly affects our currency movement. Political instability can depreciate local currency because political issues are one of the major concerns of foreign investors. Finally, US dollar strength. The US dollar relatively attracts foreign investors as the US Federal Reserve bullish stance on interest rate compared with other countries' central banks. In addition, in terms of economic progress and monetary policy, the US is far ahead compared with other developed countries. For this year, investors noted a larger quantum of rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve, and it expected to increase interest rate due to the rise of 8.5% inflation in March. Therefore, the US dollar strengthened, causing our currency to weaken.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Aishatul Nisha binti Muhammad Zain. So, today I will explain about the advantages when ringgit Malaysian depreciates. There is 4 advantages when ringgit Malaysian falls. The first advantages is export will grow. Second, tourism will boost. Third, increase in foreign investment. And lastly, Malaysian will work abroad will generate a higher income. For the first advantages, export will grow. A weak ringgit Malaysia may stimulate Malaysian industry by making it more inexpensive for overseas market to purchase Malaysian-made goods. Increased demand for local product is anticipated to boost earnings for certain industries. Export-oriented enterprise that sells to overseas markets will gain the benefits from a lower ringgit Malaysia since they have bigger sales volume. For the second advantages, tourism sector will boost. Foreign tourists will gain benefits from a weaker ringgit Malaysia because it gives them more purchasing power. Foreigners from Singapore who can visit Malaysia easily for a holiday will most likely gain the most benefit as the ringgit Malaysia falls. The third advantages when ringgit Malaysia depreciates is it will increase foreign investment. The plummeting ringgit Malaysia makes Malaysia more appealing for investment because it is cheaper to operate and acquire stocks and bonds in Malaysia. A weak ringgit Malaysia will attract foreigners to invest through foreign direct investment (FDI) and foreign investment portfolios. The last advantages when ringgit Malaysia depreciate is it will generate a higher income for Malaysians who are working in another country. Some Malaysians prefer to work abroad, such as in Singapore and the United States. This is because the value of the currency of some countries is higher than ringgit Malaysia. Therefore, when the value of ringgit Malaysia falls, they can exchange their money for a higher value for shopping in Malaysia. At the same time, it will increase their purchasing power while spending their money.
Okay, so now we are going to continue with the disadvantages when our currency is depreciated. So first of all, there will be increase in the price of the goods and services. So how the price of the goods and services can be increased when our ringgit Malaysia is falling? So this scenario is happen due to the rising costs in import activities. Our domestic producer, they need to spend more on the production costs and sell their product and output at a higher price to cover up the production costs. So that's why we know that there's a new policy in our country where the minimum wages is increased up to 1,500. So this is the way where the government want to help us to support the rising price, especially on foods, because our currency is falling and the price of goods and services is increasing. So now we are going to the second point. It is inflation. So what is inflation? So inflation is an scenario. It's happened when there's an increasing of price in the goods and services. Okay, so when the price of goods and services is increasing, it's inflation, where the value of our money is getting lower. So to understand it easier, as we can see in the picture, okay, so there's a picture where we can see that maybe 10 years ago we can buy a full of trolley at the supermarket by only 50 ringgit. Okay, but this day by 50 ringgit we could only afford half of the trolley. And maybe for the next 5 years, our 50 ringgit maybe could only afford 3 things in the supermarket. Okay, so that is what inflation is. Our money value is getting lower due to the increasing price of goods and services. Okay, so after an inflation, we as consumer, our purchasing power will getting lower. Okay, why? Because when the price of a good and services is keep rising and there is an inflation, our money value is getting lower. So those things will effectively and directly decrease the number of goods and services that we could buy. Just same explanation just now, where maybe today we could buy half of the trolley in the supermarket by 50 ringgit, but maybe in the next month we could only buy one of cooking oil by 50 ringgit at the same supermarket, right? So this is what the disadvantages when our currency is keep depreciate and fall.
Next, I will explain about the effects of currency depreciation. When an exchange rate changes, the value of one currency will go up, while the value of other currency will go down. However, currency depreciation also has some effects. First of all, it may result in currency depreciation increasing the burden of repayment of debt denominated in foreign currencies and tends to create a vicious cycle of further currency depreciation. For instance, the government need to spend more to settle their debt to other countries with higher currency rates. Next, exports are cheaper. Depreciation of the currency will make export more competitive and appear cheaper to foreigners. This will increase demand for exports. Higher export volumes spur economic growth to encourage an activity or development or make it happen faster, but if the exports are cheaper, it can slow the country's economic growth. Other than that, import prices may increase. In general, a weaker currency increases the cost of imports while promoting export by making them more affordable for customers outside, which tend to increase demand. Locals frequently purchase less imported goods when the local currency declines because imports become more expensive. Next, it can cause inflationary. Due to imports become more expensive, most countries consume some imported products, materials, or technology, and with a weaker currency, the additional cost is transmitted to prices. The supplier will pass on the cost of imported components, including raw materials, to customers, which can make customers less willing to purchase and reduce the purchasing power, or it can be high demand from customers but less supplies from the supplier. Then, loss of credibility from the investors. Additionally, other income considerations like interest rates and capital gains from local stocks are impacted by the exchange rate. Currency depreciation raises the cost of imported inputs, leading to a decline in profits. Because of that, decreased profits in turn could discourage firms from investment, which can lead to decline in domestic private investment growth and lost credibility from investors as the result of currency depreciation. Lastly, country will become less interested by foreign workers because they will prefer to work with other countries that have higher currency rates such as Singapore compared to Malaysia. They can get higher income when they work in Singapore because for $1 Singapore dollar, they can get around 3.16 Malaysia ringgit, and Malaysia ringgit will become less valuable for them to generate more money to accommodate with their living costs.
I, Muhammad Afiq Hakimi bin Nasruddin, matrix number 2020891332, will continue to explain how to overcome current depression. First, the government can sell the foreign exchange asset purchased on currency. We know over 1.4 trillion US government bonds are held by China. The dollar will weaken and the Chinese yuan will strengthen if the Chinese sold their treasury note and return the earrings home. The supply of dollar will grow while Chinese yuan on demand will rise. China might bring about a pretty considerable decline in the value of dollar because of huge holding in dollars. In fact, China might raise their currency by simply refraining from purchasing further US assets. China now maintains a sizable currency account surplus with the United States. Normally, an appreciation would result from the inflow of the cash to China. However, China have chosen to utilize its foreign exchange profit to acquire US assets. They do this thing to keep the yuan weaker and maintain the competitiveness of their export. Second, the government can raise interest rates. Some few hot money flows might be attracted by higher interest rates. Hot money flow happen when the banks and financial organizations transfer funds and abroad to benefit from the higher rates of the return of saving. Higher interest rate is developed nation provide a considerable incentive to regulate money and saving given and that interest rates are almost nil in the US. Third, the government must reduce inflation. If inflation is relatively lower than the other nation, then the item will be more desirable and demand will increase. Long term, lower inflation usually rate and the value of currency. The government of central bank and implementing fiscal and monetary policy will supply side strategy in lower inflation. Lastly, government can introduce supply side policy to increase the long-term competitiveness. A high exchange rate depends on underlying economic conditions over a long run. Countries will require a mix of volume inflation, productivity, growth, economy and political stability and favorable exchange rate. For instance, even if India raises its rate, in current rate might not increase as a result. This is where the fact that investors were concerned about India's high inflation rate despite the country's high interest rate. The government will need to experiment the supply side policy will boost competition and lower production costs in order to increase the value over the long term. For instance, privatization and reduced regulation may help export industry and become more competitive over a long term. That's all for me. Thank you.